Welcome everybody to today's Topics in Tech. This is our first multi-access event here in the Sandbox. You can agree that we're going to press that thing that somewhere that says we're doing this.
I don't see it. Is it on your screen?
So just touch the screen.
Oh, it's a touch screen. Got it.
Hey, look at that.
There we go.
Great technology. So this is our first multi-access event in the Sandbox, and it is so cool to have Brian back here. Brian was in my class in, I was trying to figure this out, 1998.
98 I started. Yeah, 98 to 2002.
Which tells you how old both of us are. And he was telling me that when he got to Bentley, this building was a pile of bricks, or it was the side of a mountain.
Yes.
And this building was just going up in around 2000. And this room wasn't quite like this. And computers were a whole lot easier back then and a lot bigger.
And we walked uphill to class, but I guess that's still the case.
Yeah, I guess that's still the case too. And Brian has worked with several software companies in a number of different roles since he left Bentley. And I followed him on LinkedIn for years, and it's so cool to have you back. So
Thanks. It's
Brian,
good to be
we're
back.
gonna talk today about working in software development without doing a whole lot of coding. So I'll keep an eye on the time. We have about an hour or so.
Okay.
And feel free to take questions, and I'll monitor the chat. If there's any questions with the chat, and we'll ask away and see how it goes.
And to be clear, I think I have about 15 slides, so hopefully we'll have some conversation. So thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so when Mark said, what would you like to present about, I kind of thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about some of the jobs in software development that are not actually software development, not engineering.
Can you share your screen?
Am I not
Oh,
sharing?
you are.
Yeah.
Got it. Can you guys see your screen? Yes. Okay.
Which in my case is a lot of project management and product management, and talk about kind of what's going on with those, what I've learned, a little bit of my journey. Hopefully that will be valuable to you. So I think that's the plan. Yeah, so I've been working professionally for about 19 years. I really thought when I graduated, I was just going to be a software developer. In fact, actually, I started my career. I distinctly remember working at a startup my senior year, doing like nothing but development, thinking like this is it. And I'll walk you through what happened, but I've kind of gone on a different journey. It's been a lot of fun, but it's looked a little bit different. And it's actually even interesting as I think through some of the jobs today, there really was there were no college courses. There was no career track for some of this stuff. So I'll offer you guys the caveat that this is what's worked for me. This is my perspective. So your mileage may differ a little bit, but I'm happy to share. Just so I have a sense that, so show of hands, who here is an undergraduate? Okay, mostly undergraduates, almost everyone. A couple graduates? Yeah. So who?
And on Zoom, tell us who you are. You could just introduce yourself briefly in chat so you can see that.
And then I guess show of hands, is everyone computer information systems? Or we changed the majors? Are there other software ones now or tech ones?
Let's just go around and do a quick bit of introduction so that we all know. You want to start? Just
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
What class you're in? We'll go.
Yeah, my name is Sandy. I'm a sophomore majoring in data analytics.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm a sophomore as well, majoring in CIS.
Okay.
And you guys online can type in.
I'm Mike, finance major, but I love Python.
Don't we all?
Sarah, I'm a freshman. I'm undecided.
Thanks.
I'm Ashley. I'm a freshman as well. I'm also undecided.
I'm Stefan, I'm a freshman, and I'm also excited.
I'm Mia. I'm a freshman. I'm also undecided.
I'm Andre, I'm a freshman, I'm also undecided.
We'll decide for you on there.
Thank you.
I'm Nicole. I'm a senior, computer information systems major.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Harrison. I'm an MBA student. So currently taking 610 and the GR6 web course.
Okay.
Harrison was in my class this summer online. This is the first time we get to meet.
Nice.
And I'm Sandra, I'm also first year MBA student.
Awesome.
And you guys online want to tell us who you are? Please unmute and just scream. I'll call you Peter.
Yeah, hi, I'm Peter. I'm a freshman and I'm a major in data analytics.
Oh, thank you. Brett.
I'm Brett. I'm a senior and I'm majoring in computer information systems.
EMALI at falcon.bentley.edu. Joseph Anderson? You're a freshman at Eagle Flight. Cool, thank you.
Nice.
Josh?
My name is Josh. I'm a freshman and my major is undecided.
Madeline?
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm a freshman and I also am undecided.
Michaela?
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm a freshman and I'm also undecided.
And Varela?
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a freshman and I'm also undecided.
Peter? Did I get you already? Everybody's names are moving around on my screen. Tyler? And Scott, I think is your friend, right?
Yes, yeah.
Your colleague, okay. You guys can introduce yourselves
You
as
should
well.
just keep him muted. Anything he shares.
I am a 22nd year senior who's undecided about many things and happened to work with Brian.
You're
For
very-
Brian, I should say.
And Tyler is a finance major in the software. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for your introductions.
Awesome. So yeah, so I think kind of the plan for today is I want to walk you a little bit through my career, which has really been focused on kind of product management, project management, some development at the beginning, talk about kind of my journey, what I've learned, talk a little bit about the trends going on in the industry and how they kind of tie into these two particular, professions. Before we do though, I do kind of want to reiterate, and don't worry, you don't have to actually look at that diagram. It's a very cool one put out by John Allspaw, and I'll explain it. But I do want to say that when I say not coding, it doesn't mean that you don't understand code, or it doesn't mean that you don't understand technology. John Allspaw, I believe was the CTO at Etsy at one point. Oh, I should be very careful to not move this thing. Okay, apologies for that effect. And what he talks about is he talks about this idea of the concept of your product. And when you talk to people, a lot of people will point down here and they'll look at systems diagrams, they'll look at the source code. But when you take a further step back, you start to get into, well, there's the monitoring systems, there's actually the configuration management, there's the deploying, there's the tools, and all of this is entirely invisible, right? There's no actual physical manifestation of your code. It becomes this stuff on the top. It becomes the people who figure out what we're going to build, the people who interact with the system, the people who maintain the system. And this above area is where the work happens. But the reaction of it, the output of it happens below the line where you can't see. So even if you aren't writing code, I would say you need to be fluent in code. You need to be fluent in technical concepts if you're going to really have a meaningful conversation. I'm going to embarrass myself with a sports analogy, but it's like you need enough language to say the bases are loaded and there are 3 strikes, as opposed to I see a bunch of people in the field and they're throwing a ball at a guy with a bat, right? Like that context makes a huge difference. So when we talk about working in technology, you really have to speak technology, and the challenge is it does move fast. So I think one of the things is if you came in thinking, oh, this is a great excuse to not have to kind of stay relevant, I'm sorry to disabuse you of that. It still is a requirement. It just simply means I'm not the one writing the code. So let me walk you through my journey, and then maybe this will shed a little light. So yeah, I graduated in 2002. Actually, that startup I was working in college went out of business. So I said to myself, I should go work for a big bank because that's clearly safe. Nothing's going to happen to Fleet, biggest bank in New England. And I started as a Java developer. Like I said, I really thought I was going to be a developer. And that was going great for a few years until they got bought by Bank of America. And I was still being a Java developer, and I distinctly remember this. This is the moment that I kind of left development professionally, where my boss's boss just kind of taps me on the shoulder, just like, come over here. Takes me into her office and closes the door. I'm kind of worried. And she's like, so, we really like you. Don't be afraid. And then she's like, this is totally your choice. Please don't feel any pressure at all. But there's no future in software development. We're sending it all offshore. We want to promote you and make you a project manager. But you don't have to. Again, totally your choice, no pressure. That was the day I became a project manager. And in the case of Bank of America, where we had these huge operations, there was a lot of kind of what we call like accidental complexity. There's the dependencies between people, the dependencies between groups, the acquisition, that a lot of that had to be managed. And honestly, there was less going on in development, or a lot of development was going to other places. And I stayed there for a few years, and I went to Investors Bank and Trust in Boston. And then they actually got bought by State Street, so I kept moving. And actually, as I moved into Investors Bank and Trust, and then we did consulting work, I actually found that being a project manager was fun. But like, I distinctly remember this project that we finished that met all its requirements. In fact, I got like a great year-end review, but the business never used it. In fact, actually, like, they completely just mothballed it immediately because it wasn't what they actually wanted. And I remember talking to my boss. This is the one who actually promoted me. Well, she was now my boss. And saying this feels very unsatisfying. And she's saying, well, that's not your fault. You built what they asked for. Like, it's not your fault that they asked for the wrong thing. And that felt very unsatisfying to me. So I kind of started to explore being a business analyst. And then actually going even further to being a consultant and getting very into process improvement and what has been called Agile. And it was a lot of extreme programming and development. On a side note, how do people explain Agile? It wasn't in college. It wasn't in college when I was here. So when people talk about like a software methodology, how do people explain it? Yeah.
It means that you kind of adapt to like the emergent requirement that comes out. You don't have like the design requirement up front. And then you also divide your construction into several sprints.
Okay. Do they still talk about waterfall and like kick poor Winston Royce, who ironically introduced the idea of waterfall as a theoretical construct and said it won't work? But somehow, yeah, they put it on him. And it's kind of funny, 30 years ago. So I spent a lot of time as an Agile coach and doing a lot of work with organizations to adopt those behaviors you just mentioned, right? This idea of how do we build a cross-functional team? How do we get them to work together? And it was much more focused on the team. And then I kind of spent, after doing some consulting, I went over and I worked at Taxware, which was a private equity company. The thing I will say that I learned about private equity, it moves very fast, and it is for some. Was not for me. And then I worked at Athena Health. And in this case, it was doing more product management, where I think kind of the term of business analyst has evolved. And now we see much more of a focus, especially in big tech companies, what we would call product management. And then towards the tail end of that, actually went back into Agile. And that kind of brings me to today. So at this point, I'm working at Wolters Kluwer, where I am the director for Agile, project management, and operational excellence. So I do less. I help other people do stuff, like Scott, who's on the line. And what you'll notice is that, yeah, I actually very quickly stopped doing development. And while I play with, like, I have some side Python projects, like I haven't professionally coded in quite some time, but I've like to think I've done reasonably well. Now, the challenge, and this has been particularly hard these last 2 years, is like my kids and my in-laws and different people have literally heard me work because, we've all been working from home, is, we kind of come to this question of what would you say you do here? As in, you're not writing the code, you're organizing other people. Like, why can't the people just organize themselves? Why can't, why do we need these people who are focused on process and product? And I'll offer kind of one example. Are people familiar kind of with the idea of Ackoff's lift? This is a organizational renewal case study. It's used in a lot of different cases. I think some consultants will claim it, but I believe Ackoff is the one in Recreating Corporation who cited it, where very old hotel in New York City, I believe. And everyone was complaining about the speed of the elevators. And again, it was probably a 100-year-old hotel or building. So changes to the elevators were incredibly expensive. The engineers started to look at it, the complexity, just the cost of this project cascaded to the point where it was kind of identified as an unsolvable problem. You will have slow elevators in this, or you're basically rebuilding the building. As they stewed on this problem, at some point, actually, an organizational psychologist got involved, and he reframed it. And he said, well, is the problem that the elevators are slow, or is the problem that people think they're waiting too long? And if the problem is that they think they're waiting too long, how can we solve that problem? Thoughts? You've all probably experienced it. Yeah.
Like elevator music or
in this case, it was mirrors, but yes. And what they found was, yeah, that if it's a game of perception, if the problem is perception, there's a million things you can do to distract people. And apparently mirrors are great because people look at themselves in the mirrors, and they actually found interesting things like men watch themselves more than women in the mirrors. So, that which was an intractable engineering problem became a small retrofit of the elevator lobbies. to the point where after that, they got compliments about what did you do to fix the elevators? So I guess I'd posit to you that not all problems are engineering problems. And the difference in the effort between doing those mirrors and rebuilding, the internal structure of a building is the opportunity of really understanding a problem domain. And this isn't to say that a developer or an engineer can't do that, but I think it's more to say that, there's real value in understanding the frame and understanding the problem, and that can be a job in its own right. Questions, thoughts? All right. So I think another thing I'd reinforce, so there's probably a few technical jobs I can't talk too much, or non-technical jobs I can't talk too much about UX and active data analysis. I can't claim to have done those professionally yet. But regardless of the particular job, I would kind of encourage you to think about it as more of it's more of a spectrum, or perhaps in this case, a really awkward triangle, right? Where if I'm kind of looking at people in this world, there's a mix of business skills, process skills, and some amount of technical skills. And you end up somewhere in there, right? And it's not that you should never probably be all the way in any one corner. It's about kind of finding the balance. And we'll dig into these. When I talk about business skills, I'm talking about things like, one part would be domain expertise, right? Knowing the nature of a business, being able to do requirements and, business case generation, being able to do what we would call today product management. And on the process side, you probably would hear a lot of project management, process improvement, facilitation, things that a lot of people would call, I'll put it in air quotes, agile. We won't get into the technical, but I think that what you'll find is there's a lot of gray between these two and a lot of different jobs. So let's talk about the business ones. The titles that you probably would see most often today would be product manager or product owner. You might also see business analyst, business systems analyst, some combination of those different things, but product manager and product owner are probably the two most common. With, I'd say product owner probably was the most common. It was very tied to Scrum. It's kind of this named role in Scrum where each team gets a product owner. I think that where the industry is moving is now this understanding that there's more than just telling a team what to do. There's talking to customers, there's road mapping, there's a whole bunch of things. And you've seen the term product manager emerge. Sometimes you'll see organizations where it's like the product manager is the more senior person, and then the product owners are the ones who work with teams. That's probably not the best pattern, but you certainly see it. And we start talking about career opportunities. Sometimes that's a great way to get into an organization. I think the big trend going on right now is there's a move away from out features and to outcomes. So, and this is in particular in software companies and kind of big tech, where it's less about the number of features that you can ship, right? I think we probably hit peak features, in the Microsoft Office suite many years ago. And it's more about being able to get the outcomes, being able to achieve the results that really matter. And you'll see a lot of people talking about OKRs or other methods where I care less that you ship 3 features. I care more that you grow a certain market share. Or I care that, if we're serving a customer, that we're able to move some sort of business metric. And that starts to look very different than it did perhaps a little while ago, where it's like understand the user's requirements and implement them. I think kind of some of the big challenges. One is if you're playing in this role, especially early on, a lot of people will go into a role like a product owner or product manager in the job description, especially if we're talking, in a kind of a lower cohort, we'll say, be the CEO of your own team or your own product. My experience is that is never true. And the fact of the matter is that most of the people who work hands-on with the team, especially in large companies, are accountable to a whole bunch of people above them, which means that stakeholder management becomes really powerful, really important. And probably the most important thing is actually being able to say no. Because the way that the work gets presented to you is I have 30 things that all these different people across the organization need. Can you get them done? By the way, I'm going to evaluate you on your ability to get them done. Can you get them done? And the fact of the matter is that you can't. And you have to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't alienate your stakeholders, that keeps them talking about what their real problems are and allows you to focus on the real outcome. Like, it was interesting. So when I was at Athena Health, I was responsible for product management for our customer onboarding group. So Athena Health is this big EHR. And it's really fascinating because the way it would work is we would help companies, we'd help medical practices get paid. And the argument was we can get them paid faster and more because we have our own engine. We can look to see how the insurance companies are going to look at your data, are going to look at your claims, and we'll tell you in advance if that claim is going to get denied. And in exchange for that, we'll take a small percentage. But what was interesting is it meant if we sold to a customer, they gave a small deposit. But if they weren't live, they weren't actually using our system, we collected no money. And they're paying us nothing. So their ability to walk away is very, very easy. So we had a lot of very, very urgent requests to make our onboarding experience, faster and better. And we had the large group that could, come and say, well, I have an X million deal. We have the small group. We said, well, I'm supporting, this many number of people. And it was actually funny. One of the most powerful things we did that we had apparently never done before was like, rather than I, as the product manager, talk to each one individually, like we brought everyone together into a room and said, okay, we have one team. Like we can work on whatever you guys want, but you have to understand that all of you are asking from the same group. So what gets us the best? And then actually getting them to talk became the really, really powerful thing. These are some of the challenges people don't think about. What makes this job really, and then I guess the other one is just kind of what's asked versus what's needed, much like that elevator. When you're playing in this role, especially early on, there'll probably be a thing of like, we'll tell you what to build and then figure out how to build it. And I guess the one thing I've learned is you should never assume that what someone's asking for is what they actually need. It's a good starting place, but chances are what they truly need is something different. What makes this job fun is that if you're looking for a place where you can see making a difference with your customers, with end users, this is probably the closest you're ever going to get. And like, if you want to see that impact, being in product management is incredibly powerful. If you're doing it well, you're talking to your customers all the time, you're seeing the difference. And hopefully that's actually something you can share with the development team and all the other people around you, but it can be a pretty cool part of the job. So this is kind of the product focused jobs. Questions, thoughts? The one thing I'd say that's tricky here, there are not a ton of entry-level jobs into product management. I think you'll see some software companies look for, and they probably call it product owner, or you might see business analyst, but a lot of times this is seen as a job where they're going to get someone out of graduate school who has worked before, or it's going to be someone who actually was an engineer and moved within the organization. Yeah.
So how did your experience, like years of working as a product manager matter? Because when you started at Bank of America, becoming a product manager, is that kind of the same thing that you do now?
Not at all. I think it's changed a lot. And I think that what you find is that there's some practices that become useful and can continue on. And there's things that are just really not terribly relevant anymore. And I think the other thing is working in a traditional company versus working in a kind of a big tech company is a big difference. I think that when you start looking at a tradition, like, so if we're thinking Boston, like a Fidelity would be a great example where they invest a ton of money in technology, but they are an investment company, right? They're not Wayfair, they're not Google, they're not, and you call Microsoft big tech. So, in that sort of situation, product management is going to look very different. It's going to be about working with stakeholders. And I think those skills hold, even if some individual practices change. But yeah, I mean, a lot of what you learn, a lot of what I learned in 20 years is probably not relevant anymore. Other questions? Yeah.
Question. I see you work for the Agile Center of Excellence, right?
Yes.
So there are lots of like digital transformations, innovations going on in the job market.
Yep.
So how would you leverage your Agile expertise to help the organization to go through the digital transformation?
So you're asking how do we help, or how have I helped organizations go through digital transformations?
You have tons of Agile experience.
Can we hang on to that till the end?
Oh, yeah.
I have feelings. Among them don't, but let's hang on to that one to the end, just because it's going to be it's going to be a little bit of a tangent. And I'd be happy to chat about it, but I guess maybe that would be a segue to where we're talking more about process focused jobs. So if the product focused job is really, we're building something valuable, the process focused job, I think this is where you'll see project managers, you'll see program managers, you'll see Scrum Master, Agile coach. I believe Agile delivery manager is getting a lot of traction these days. You could probably take these words and combine them in different ways. And these are the types of titles that you'll see. I think this is where you see a lot of digital transformation or Agile transformation, or I think you're hearing those terms a lot right now. But I would say that whether we're saying kind of traditional project management or Scrum Master, this is the process job. right? And I think that where you see a lot of these are in those traditional companies. And oh geez, I don't know. It was like the CS 400 class, and I'm sure it's all changed. But like they talk about, I forget, what's that?
460.
Yeah, right. When they talk about,
We still have that.
we do.
We
So,
do.
so are people familiar with the idea of accidental versus essential complexity? No, we are not. So let me offer you an example of essential complexity. And I'll offer this in my current company. So we produce software that's used by doctors. Something like 90-something% of US doctors use our flagship product called UpToDate, which is a clinically curated by several hundred doctors summary of every single article. So we're in New England. Ticks and Lyme are fairly common in New England, but they are not in Arizona. So imagine you're a doctor in Arizona, you have a patient who you think might have Lyme disease, you can use our product UpToDate, look up Lyme disease and see the most clinically relevant procedures, practices based on the most up-to-date, per the name, research. Search becomes really, really important. Searching on a drug name, searching on on a diagnosis, searching on a trend, it can actually be really, really important and also kind of risky, right? Because say I'm searching on a condition or a drug and I misspell it. We have to make sure that we show all the options so that you can find the one, or you can perhaps see the one you really meant and not accidentally go to the wrong drug. That's the essential complexity of, based on a couple terms, getting to the content. Now, we happen to have 3 different teams. We have a team that builds our content, and they're totally separate and totally isolated, and they have their own infrastructure, and they build their content, and it goes out, onto our web farms in a series of XML, roughly, that our second team, which builds the front end that reads it, they are independent and they read that content. And then our search team will go also read that and they will index it. And then they will have APIs to which our front end can call that search engine. This is all accidental complexity. This is not essential to the nature of the problem. It's decisions that we made that make our work harder. It's even, I could keep going, right? We could get into the situation that we're a B2B company. So if we ship a new feature and we don't tell our support people how to support it, they can't support it. If our salespeople can't sell it, it doesn't exist. So what you find is in a lot of these traditional organizations, it's less about figuring out the product, right? Chances are we have a huge existing market, 90% of US doctors, right? Where we have lots of challenges is that accidental complexity. The idea that we are an amalgamation of 4 different companies and there's different backends. And for what to you, the end user, looks like one product is actually 2 on the back end, and we have to reconcile that. A lot of these things become where kind of this process work comes, where we have to coordinate dependencies, where we have to prioritize amongst 30 different projects with different stakeholders. You see a lot more demand for this in traditional companies. Although I will say, if you start looking for jobs at Amazon, they have or Salesforce, or pretty much any of them, they have this idea of a technical program manager. And they will talk about really big projects that span the horizon. So I mean, one of the interesting things that I find fascinating is you see big tech slowly needing this a little bit. But I would say that this is more focused in traditional companies. If you graduate and you get a couple years under your belt and you want to go be, say, a Scrum Master, you're not going to find a Scrum Master job at Facebook or Google or a startup. You will see it at State Street or Fidelity. It's neither good nor bad, it's just different. I think the tricky thing with process is that you're not the subject matter expert, right? It's not your job to know the design. It's not your job to dig into the technical problem, but it is your job to ask just enough to know what's really going on. It is your job to engage with the engineers and with the stakeholders and make sure that we're aligned. And I think that for some people, this is a tough balancing act because it's not really about you. You don't get to be the smartest person in the room who has the best answer. And if you try to be, you're going to be at a disadvantage, or sometimes you might alienate the people you really need to work with. I would say that when you're really doing kind of a process job, your job is to make a team of individuals work together as a team. And if they're doing a really good job, they're going to achieve more than you ever could as an individual. That can be hard. I would say there's this concept of servant leadership. Let me offer you an example. So I believe I have about 40 people. No, sorry, I'm too high. About 25 people who report to me in my team. When I have a meeting that for a project I'm working on, I will still take notes. I will take notes because I found it's a very effective facilitation technique. I can keep people focused on the right thing. We can agree on action items. But there are also sometimes in organizations viewing of the person who is the lowest rank is going to take the notes, or that's a menial job that is beneath a senior person. You know, and I think that there's this concept of when we talk about servant leadership, that sometimes you can lead by serving. And it's sometimes thankless, but if you don't care about the credit and you care about the, and you care about the, wow, it jumped a lot. Sorry about that. Uh-oh. Stupid touch screen. So what I was saying is, if you're okay with, not necessarily getting all the credit, I think process jobs can be a lot of fun. I think you can have a huge impact. And I would say this is probably actually mostly where I am today. Thoughts or questions on this?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So when you talk about process, right? So generally in the Agile, there's the word named velocity.
Yep.
How about the COVID-19? How do you think, is that really impacting your velocity? So while you do the iteration for your sprints?
So you're saying we talk about velocity, and I'm sorry, what was your question about velocity?
About the impact bring by the COVID-19,
Oh.
Yeah, so.
So I would actually say in the height of COVID-19, our pure throughput went up. In fact, actually, we measured this. We had data. We actually found that most people were working a few extra hours, and people were actually churning out more stuff. I think the downside we've seen to COVID-19 is what we're not doing is we're not stopping and talking. So so it's interesting, like a team can charter and they can run. And if they have a good direction, they've done great for the last year and a half. If we need to stop that team, talk about what's going on and make a new plan, that's been a lot harder. The fact that we can't get people together has actually been difficult. Yeah.
So are there a lot of entry-level jobs in this field, and what kind of skills are they looking for?
So honestly, I would say one of the best ways into this is consulting. And I don't mean to sound too cynical, but there's an interesting dynamic. If you can get into a consulting company, as far as everyone knows, you're the expert. And actually, this is very much what I saw when I was a consultant. Is you are what they think you are, and they are what you present. So if you can get into a company, lots of consulting firms will do large IT projects. And in a consulting engagement, a project manager is really important because there's very real expectations about schedule, scope, budget, right? Because chances are there's a contract behind that. So I would actually say getting into a technical consulting company can be a great path towards this. I think sometimes you'll see entry-level project management jobs. I'd always be careful about those sometimes at a company. Sometimes you'll see a business analyst sort of job. And in some organizations, the business analyst kind of is an entry and a stepping stone into a project management job, where it's kind of like the business analyst, you're the one who's going to write down the requirements, you're going to maintain some of the documentation, and you're working with a more senior project manager who's guiding the whole thing to get interesting outcomes, or valuable outcomes, I should say. And eventually, if you do that for a few years, you can grow up to the next one. The other interesting thing around project management in particular is there is a very, very robust field of certifications. And it won't guarantee that you get a job, but things like the PMP will actually get you enough skills and an interesting thing that might get you more conversations. I can actually say I got into Agile because I got my PMP. Because it required ongoing education. So I started going to conferences. So I started talking to people who were talking about, at the time they called it extreme programming. And that was kind of what lit the spark. So some of these larger professional organizations can be very valuable resources, and they can give you enough credentials to get into more conversations. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is more in line with what you're doing now.
This is probably, so if I were to put myself on, apparently I can't go backwards. If I were to put myself in this triangle, I would say I'm probably, well, actually I'm probably somewhere in the middle, but I'm probably a little bit closer to process than business right now. I think one thing I have found is you never quite want to get pinned down into one thing. You never want to be the process person or the business person or the techie. Like, it's useful. The more skills you can bring to bear, the more flexibility you have, and the more things you, oh, sorry, I really need to stop moving this. The more things you can do to solve a problem. Other thoughts or questions?
You're right. I remember I was in a job where I was pigeonholed at doing only one thing, and it didn't go very far.
Yeah.
Because you never have the opportunity to try other things, and when you want to, if that's not your job is.
I mean, one of the really interesting things in the 3 years when I've been, kind of at Wolters Kluwer is, as a very successful company, sometimes companies don't get pushed. And as a really strong organization with a really strong product, it was funny how we had seen that some things like that had happened. Like, I distinctly remember talking with some people who were like, well, our developers would never want to talk to a customer. They don't have people skills. Like, they just want to be sitting and coding. And, we don't have as many experiences like this as I like, but what we're finding is, hey, if we bring a developer to a customer call, a lot of times they ask the right question, that all of a sudden back to that elevator problem reframes it and changes it totally. Or at the very least, when they go back to their desk, they understand a lot of little things that weren't explained clearly. So I would say that, like, as much as possible, avoid any corner, on something like this. Like, you really don't want to be that lopsided. I think that you'll hear people in the industry talk about this idea of being T-shaped. Have people heard this? So if you imagine, like an Excel spreadsheet, right, where width is number of skills and depth is your proficiency in them. They said you want to be T-shaped, and that you should have a little bit of a lot of skills, and then one or two things that you're really, really good at. Other questions? All right. So I think there's two things I do want to kind of talk about. We're just looking at larger trends that are impacting these positions. And the first is Agile. And maybe now I can indulge your conversation a little bit. I think the first thing I would say is, at this point, I don't know of a company that says they're not doing Agile. And I would go so far as to say that most companies are doing Agile, right? And if we're thinking about the distinction of Agile versus traditional software development, in traditional or waterfall development, the idea is that, let's put this down for a second. The idea is, we're gonna go through a series of gates. We're gonna understand a problem. We're gonna get all the requirements. Then we're gonna develop the perfect design. Then we're gonna build it. Then we're gonna test it. Then we're gonna deploy it after, well, usually a year, right? Because of corporate planning. And it will be wonderful. And we just have to manage that project. Whereas Agile, which came very much with web technology, was this idea of we'll work in, early on, it was 4 weeks or a month. Now you probably see a lot of 2 weeks. We'll do a sprint. And in that sprint, we will design, build, test, ideally deploy to production, or really, really close. And then we'll keep iterating on a product. The most common Agile framework out there is called Scrum, although I'd say Kanban and SAFe are getting up there if you've heard any of those. But generally speaking, Scrum and this idea of working in a 2-week sprint is really, really common. I will draw a distinction, though, between doing Agile and being Agile. And sorry if I sound like a consultant right now. When I say doing Agile, I mean you go to an organization, they say, hey, we're doing a 2-week sprint. But they might say yes. And at the end of the sprint, we're going to have half of our thing built, and it will be sitting in dev, and it will probably mostly work, but we'll test it 2 more sprints later when it's actually fully built. And then we'll do that for a while, and then we'll let it harden for another month, and then it will go to production. A lot of organizations, even if they're kind of doing the sprint type model, are not actually going to production nearly as often. A lot of them will go through the mechanics of Agile, and most organizations use those mechanics. But I would say sometimes it's the technical skills, like the ability to deploy, the ability to do automated testing is a very, very common one that gets really, really hard. And if you don't invest in it, it becomes, nigh impossible to deploy regularly. Or it also comes to a mindset, right? Going back to that idea of we don't know what our product should be. So we need to iterate, as opposed to we think we know what the solution is. So great, you can go sprint. But I don't really care until you're done. So yes, Agile team, you go be Agile, come back to me when you're done. That's where I say the mindset isn't really Agile. Like one of my best experiences we had is when I was working with an insurance company. And when you go to do that Agile transformation, the way it usually works is the first project was the easy project. That's like the layup. And then someone will come and say, well, that was the easy one. So here's the hard one. Prove you can do the hard one, and then we'll do more. So I was at this insurance company and I got the hard project. And the hard project was like an IVR. So this was the voice response thing, so that when you would dial in and it would tell you your out-of-pocket max, your in-pocket max, your deductible, your, you know, all of the different dimensions of your insurance plan. So you didn't have to talk to a human being, and thus we save money. And they had roughly understood these requirements. They had written them all up, and we started to sprint. And the key thing that we did was we would, every 2 weeks, bring in all our stakeholders and we would demo the system to the extent that it existed. And we actually brought in call agents. And we said, okay, call agent, because you're the one that the system is ideally going to protect. Go through it and let us know, would you want to talk to a person who went through that experience? And it was really funny because, you know, the team was diligently building exactly what everyone thought they needed. And like, we would watch our call agents get increasingly frustrated. And like, there was a moment, maybe 6 weeks in, where like one of the call agents is like, I would have hung up by now. And they just didn't think through the complexity and having an audio voice, you know, read out and how long it would take. And they actually did adjust, to their credit, and they changed the product based on that feedback. That doesn't happen as often as we'd like to think it does. And I guess I'd say that right now you hear everyone says Agile. If you go and look at even a project management job, it's probably going to say Scrum, Agile certifications, in addition to run a Gantt chart, or a lot of other things. So the term Agile, I think, kind of means almost nothing. And in fact, actually, I would argue the idea of a digital transformation is a little bit of consultant speak to make work, because it's a means to an end, and you really need to be focused on the end. When organizations start these big things saying, hey, we're going to go be Agile, they last 6 months to 12 months, and then they get tired. When organizations say, hey, we need to launch a new product in an area, we need to improve our quality, we need to do something that is valuable intrinsically to us, much better things happen. But it's always this temptation to say we're doing Agile. The other big question that is going on right now is, when I started, you know, everything was a project. We would start a project and it'd probably run to the end of the year because, you know, again, annual budgeting. What's happening now, and I think this is probably a better tell of the sophistication of a company, is when they're running programs. So like, you know, where I am now, historically, we charter and we run projects. We'll say this, here's the goal that we want. That's going to take 6 months. We have 3 people or 4 people on a Scrum team. They'll go with it. Awesome. What's becoming interesting and what we're seeing more and more of is this idea where we say, you know what? So like, we're working on this one project where we're trying to improve the usability and the accessibility of our content, right? Going back to the idea that I might search on a term, or I might be moving around, and this understanding that as the content grows, in a strange way, as our product becomes better, it becomes worse. As we add more specialties, as we add more content, the likelihood that you're going to get lost goes up. So, you know, the goal of a project or a program, you know, and they'll call it resonance, but the goal is to make sure people get to the right piece of data. And they came up with metrics to measure that. And now the goal of this program is to move that number. And it has now run for over a year. And it's going to just keep running, and it will be evaluated by that number, not did we deliver the 10 features that we said, not did we, you know, I mean, to a certain extent, we kind of fix date, we fix money. We say we're going to spend X number of people for this amount of time, go get these outcomes, run this program. I think that's where you're seeing a lot of organizations get more sophisticated. And I think that when you pull back and all of a sudden we care less about the management of a schedule and we care more about those outcomes, I think that's when you see product management becoming a lot more important. What's actually even interesting is, like, in my team, we have, you know, we're called program managers. And in fact, actually, you know, a lot of our focus has been on helping our development teams deliver. And where a lot of our people are going right now actually is talking to contracting, talking to pricing, talking to implementation, because what we're finding is that the real challenges sometimes are not even in the development. It's the ideas that get to development. So it's funny, as we've matured, what we found is that these people who signed up for what they thought was a job working with techies and developers to, you know, churn out code faster, have to understand our business, have to understand our pricing, have to start talking to a lot more of our business people. And I think that as we see more and more programs, you see a little bit less project management and more of that product management. Having said all that, I think the other thing that's really interesting I could only fit 8. If we added the top 10, I think the next 2 are also tech companies. So like when I graduated, this is just largest public companies, Apple, Microsoft, Aramco. So there we have one non-tech company, Google, Amazon, Facebook. So on the top 6, 5 are big tech companies. When I graduated, it was GE. Like I actually distinctly remember interviewing with GE and being really upset I missed that job. They since fallen off the Dow Jones, you know. So what I find is interesting is that big tech started really lean. And as it's gotten bigger, you see the need for more of that project management or program management. All of those companies today have kind of what they would probably use the term technical program management. And it's to achieve these bigger outcomes that span teams to realize certain outcomes. So while generally speaking, big tech is less on process, I think that as they get bigger, you're seeing more and more of that. And at the same time, the other thing that I think was interesting when I first graduated is there was always this debate. Like I distinctly remember this when I was at Fleet and then Bank of America, where they'd be like, we're a bank, we're not a technology company. And that discussion's just over. Everyone's a technology company. So while there is some differences between kind of that big tech versus that traditional company, they're getting closer, or at least they're trying to. One thing I do find that's interesting though is the way that big technology companies can get away with less project management is they invest in their technology. So like Amazon, I believe it's Amazon, it's something like 30% of all of their development effort goes to internal tools to make things more productive. So they have this rule of, well, you know, I don't know if you've heard of the 2-pizza team, where it's like a team should never be bigger than what you can, you know, than the number of people you can feed with 2 pizzas. Just as a heuristic. And the only way they can get away with that is that there's a million internal tools and services and capabilities that have been built so that they don't need to know all of the problems. I mean, I think kind of cloud technology is probably the best example of this, where we've abstracted away, you know, almost all of infrastructure and it's now software. So sometimes the traditional companies say, well, how come we can't run 2 pizza teams? And then you say, well, they're investing, you know, a huge swath of their portfolio in platform capabilities and, you know, trade-offs. That becomes a little bit harder. But I do see things moving together. And I guess kind of, yeah, so we talked a little bit about jobs. I mean, coming out of college, I wouldn't be afraid to do development for a little bit and move. Like that's absolutely what I did, even though I didn't realize it. I think there is some entry-level product management jobs. You'd probably be called product owner. A lot of times it's small software companies. A lot of them have college hiring. Like when I was at Athena Health, Athena had a pipeline from all the big colleges in, and they were very keen on growing people, and they're not the only one. Entry-level project management is harder. I would say business analysis is probably a little bit more likely. And then the other one is, yeah, consulting is a great way to get a foot in the door. A lot of people will start as a consultant, see a couple of companies, sometimes even move to that company, or at the very least use that to kind of get the skills they need to get the job that, you know, that's next for them. And then I guess I'll just share kind of, this is what's worked for me. So the first one, I said this before, is don't let yourself get cast type as anything. I feel like I've done well because I've not been able to be nailed down that often. Actually, when I start to get nailed down, it's when I get uncomfortable. It gives you more flexibility. You can't ever stop learning. Even though I'm saying you probably don't have to code your entire life, like I still have some fun Python projects that I play with, and the technology moves really, really fast. If you're staying in tech, no matter what you're doing, you kind of have to keep learning. It is even interesting that even on the non-technical things, like what's happened over the last 5 years is an entire new field called product management has really matured, and it just didn't exist when I came out. And I'm sure that or lean startup, although that's kind of now dying down. Even the non-technical stuff, there's always new ideas, and you don't want to fall behind. And then the last thing, and this is just kind of my own experience. So like, so like to give an idea, when I took that job as a consultant at Big Visible, in hindsight, it was probably one of the riskiest things I did, and I didn't quite realize it at the time, and maybe that's why I took it, because I went to go work in a consulting company that served nothing but financial interests in 2008, right before the Great Recession. And it was interesting because overnight, our entire client base dried up. We were only like 5 consultants, but I like distinctly remembered that December that year, talking with the owner, we only brought in $5,000 for the month across 5 people. And that's revenue, not counting our expenses. And, we basically kept working kind of almost unpaid for a little bit. And it's funny because I remember my wife at the time asking me, like, why are you working so hard at this? The company tomorrow could be gone. And what I kind of realized was the opportunity to learn these skills, and I was making enough, we were getting enough money, I was okay, but like the skills that I was learning were good enough that if tomorrow the company failed, I got what I needed and I would be okay. And I had that calculus, and that let me take a lot of risks at that time that turned out really well for me. And it's just interesting that like, if I look, sometimes it's like that thing that feels really risky, if it's an opportunity for you to grow, it actually might be a lot safer than you think. Sometimes staying at the same place, or staying at the big company, it's not nearly as safe as you would think it is. So I think those are kind of my insights, and I would be happy to answer any other questions you guys have.
I'll ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
And then any belly experiences that are memorable that you think helped you get move along in your career?
So yes, I would say the general business education, and in particular accounting, was huge, because sometimes I would encounter situations where people would be like, it's the business, you can't understand it. It's all very, very complicated, and it's not, it's just a different skill set. So understanding capitalization versus expense for software development is a huge one. Everyone cares about CapEx. People have to do ungodly things in timesheets to make sure that we report CapEx. But it is like, if you take an intermediate accounting class, like, you can understand that. You can understand where it's coming from. You can understand what's truly needed to be done, because a lot of times people will justify all sorts of things and almost try, going back to the idea of don't get into one corner. People try to be like, well, based on my understanding and something that's not your expertise, we have to do this. And knowing enough to be able to talk about finance and accounting is huge, because when it's all said and done, these are businesses and they kind of have to make money, otherwise they cease to exist. So I'd say that's the biggest one, above and beyond, obviously, the high quality CIS education that gave me the technical skills, to get going.
So that's my next question. So since you graduated in 2002, you had 4 different jobs?
Too many. No, more than that.
So I'm still here. Maybe I should have gone somewhere else. No, but I guess my question is, how did you know when it was time to do something else? How did you know it was time for a change? In some cases, it may not have been voluntary, but it is voluntary.
I will admit, I had a couple that probably in hindsight weren't always the best. That sometimes if I got frustrated, I would start to look. Like, I can distinctly remember the day that I decided to leave Bank of America was after we had an all-night deployment that went poorly. And like, my roommate came out and was like, wow, you're up early. And my response was, no, I'm actually up late. And that was the day I'm like, it's time to look for a new job. So I will admit, I've definitely hit that wall where frustration sometimes makes you go look for something else, which isn't always the best. I think that on my better days, when I have some sense of what I want next, and then waiting for the opportunity to come. So like, I would contrast that with where, after working at a couple big banks, seeing them get acquired, I didn't really know what I wanted next. So I just went into consulting, thinking I can do this for a few years and we'll see what happens. And that's actually when I discovered Agile consulting, and that then became a really cool opportunity. The other piece I would say is, with one exception, which is my last job, every single job has been a referral. And I know that in college, and now I'm going to be the person I made fun of or rolled my eyes. The idea of networking is actually really, really important. But I guess the one thing I'd say is, it's not like just going and talking to someone randomly in a group. It's like maintaining professional and personal relationships such that the people who you think you'd want to work with again, you keep talking to. Yeah, every single job I have gotten, except for my last, was a referral.
Can you stop sharing?
Yeah, of course.
On Zoom Labs.
Yeah, let's.
Other questions for Brian?
Yeah, no question.
Okay, 1 and then 2. And we'll get the online books in that.
So that was kind of my
question about like exit strategies. I guess I would ask you then, what does the interview process look like for you, and how that changed over
So, well, right now it's actually crazy. Our recruiters have told us that they will not let us do more than 2 rounds of interviews because people, applicants will get frustrated and leave. So at least at the moment, it's probably been the biggest change, where it is absolutely an applicant's market. And we now pay recruiters to basically troll LinkedIn and other forums to solicit people to come apply. The process has changed a bit. On the technical end, there's been a push away from coding exercises. I think those used to reign supreme, and there's lots of negative things, so you see less of them. I think the other thing that is different now is I think I see lots of group interviews. And I know that when we hire people now, it's the skills to do the job are the table stakes for the conversation. The real evaluation is this someone who's going to work well as a team player in our organization. And I think that's, so like we'll do interviews where we'll have 2 people together. Or like in some cases when we used to be able to have people come together, like if we're gonna have someone to be a scrum master or kind of project manager working with a team, we might say, hey, meet the whole team, watch them do a stand up and then you can chat with them after. We don't get to do that so much these days. Right now, it's actually been very, very constrained because the market's so tight.
with this exercises, I've seen a lot of like group case studies. What kind of interviews do they give groups in your experience?
So once you step out of a coding job, you won't get a coding exercise, but like there are some case studies. So like Athena, we would do, it was like a 3-step. It was like, there was one person who would go through your resume and make sure you had the right skills. There was one person who'd do a case study and they would like intentionally pick something that was different. Like I would almost think it's like, is this still the business case capstone class? Is that still a thing? Like the Harvard, like have you ever seen like a Harvard business case? It almost be like that, where it's like, I even remember the one I had to do for that particular job, where it's like, it was out west where there was fracking, and there's this little cafe that all of a sudden had an influx of demand because there's all these people working on the setting up the fracking sites, and it's like they have how do they expand their business? What would they do? Do they do takeout? Do they hire more people? Do they try to expand? And it's really, I want to see you apply a methodical process, right? It's more about, I want to see you think through something, then the answer is 7, and I need to see you get 7. And I think that's one of the distinctions. A lot of the coding exercises are that. And I think that's one of the reasons that people have turned on them. They still exist, but like, for example, Wolters Kluwer, the parent company, 10,000 people, I think we still have a policy, we do not allow it because there was concerns around unfairness, gaming, and like potential racism around the way that they get administered. Of course.
Other questions are here, and if you have some online, please unmute so we can raise your hand so we can call you guys as well.
So yeah, first of all, thank you for
Oh.
amazing presentation.
My pleasure.
I kind of have a very specific question.
Sure.
I'm first year MBA student.
Yep.
But I went to business school during my undergrad.
Uh-huh.
So I kind of have business experience.
Yep.
But I worked as a project manager in software development
Mhm.
company for 5 years. So
Okay.
I kind of have a
Yeah.
technical skills. But now I'm trying to move to product management.
Yes.
But I'm kind of worried about my skills in technical field, and I'm worried in every interview that someone might ask me about things that I don't know. So, what is the basics, like the minimum I should learn as a product manager? I know it changes and it's different in every organization. For example, PayPal might ask you to know R and SQL, and some might not.
Yeah.
But is there any like basic skills we should know about?
Well, I guess first of all, I will say I think that so if people couldn't hear, people online. So you did a few years as project management at a software company. You're now getting your MBA and you want to get a job into product management, and you're worried about what that will look like.
Yes.
And I guess the first thing I'd say is a lot of times that's the most valuable way that people jump into product management is they go get an MBA, and that kind of checks some boxes in people's minds around that business background. So it's a tried and true path you're pursuing. I think my answer would be Now, there will always be some companies that are just going to want to see something, but I'd argue that might not be a company you want to work at. If you in an interview have the courage to say, I don't know that skill, but perhaps you could talk like, you know what, I don't know Power BI. I've done things in Tableau and I've done some really, advanced things in Excel. I would solve it this way using those, or here's how I would learn about that. I think that in a lot of organizations, that's a fair answer. You will never know every skill. And honestly, I think that, at least when I'm hiring in my team, we will want to see people who we know can learn more things. I almost would never expect someone to come into a position and have all the skills. You can always learn skills. So it's more showing that I'm courageous enough to admit if I don't know something, and I can talk about what I would do to learn. I would say that's a fair answer, and a lot of companies would appreciate that.
I
Of
put
course.
Brian's LinkedIn page in case you're like, that's what it looks like on the last. Anybody online have a question before we stop? Okay.
So you said that you still keep learning, like technical and non-technical.
Yep.
Yeah, you have a Python project. So what are like the way that you keep yourself learning?
So like this year, I can tell you, it's like, so I just recently actually, so we made a big push into the cloud. So all of the cloud vendors have certifications. So actually, I just got the Azure Fundamentals, which is a relatively introductory one. But the idea was to go through it because when we want other people getting it, but to kind of practice what I'm preaching. The Python projects, that was actually kind of fun for a brief moment during the pandemic where I got my son to code with me. He's since outgrown it. So now I'm actually a little bit slower on that one right now. I think honestly, it's probably finding something that partly motivates you. And like, I don't know, in my career, I found I got to find things that will help me, will authentically help my company and help me in my current job, but are important enough to me that I care about them. If I can stay in that sweet spot, I have a lot of energy, and it varies. I mean, at one point, my kids were playing Dungeons and Dragons in the pandemic because they couldn't interact with their kids. So we made a Python program to determine treasure. You may not do that one, but we just picked something that was relevant to us. So I think it's more important to be relevant to you.
We should do that once. Send me to come down.
I think it's in GitHub if you find D&D tools. Any other questions?
Anything from you guys online? Before you guys go, I want to thank Brian. I also want to tell you who's coming next week. We have two more speakers in this series this semester. Next week's presentation will be entirely online, but you're welcome to come here and watch a big head on the screen. Next week, Chris Bayfarth graduated from Bentley about 10 years ago and is now the director of digital transformation at Skillsoft. Will be coming to talk about that and his journey. That's next Wednesday in this again online, and I'll send out the Zoom ID, or you can come and watch in the sandbox with the folks here. The following week we take a week off, and then the week after that, Dave Simsek, who used to work here at Bentley as a web developer and is now working at Google, we'll be talking about what it's like to work at Google, how we got a job at Google, and what's new in Google Cloud. And then the week after that, we have two more recent alumni, Ryan and Freddie, who graduated 3 or 4 years ago, talking about their career journeys as well. And so come back for those. Thanks for being, thank you guys for being here tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.